The old mill bar smelled like sawdust, stale beer, and broken dreams. Every Friday night, the same crowd gathered here, mill workers, shop owners, office types from the tech companies that had moved into the old textile buildings. Tonight felt different, though. There was electricity in the air, the kind that comes before a storm. I sat at my usual spot, nursing a beer and watching my wife Veronica hold court with her friends at the corner table. She looked radiant tonight, her blonde hair catching the dim bar lights, her laughter ringing out above the general noise. Lila, her best friend and the town's unofficial gossip queen, leaned in close, whispering something that made Veronica's eyes sparkle with mischief. "Jack, you're staring," Ben said, sliding into the seat across from me. My business partner and closest friend had that look on his face, the one that meant he knew something I didn't want to hear. "Just watching the show," I replied, taking another sip of my beer. "Ronnie's been acting strange lately, coming home late, taking calls in the other room, claiming she needs space to find herself." Ben winced. "Maybe you should." "Ladies and gentlemen," Lila's voice cut through the bar noise like a rusty blade. She stood up, raising her cosmopolitan high in the air. "I'd like to propose a toast." The bar quieted down, all eyes turning toward their table. Veronica looked embarrassed but pleased, her cheeks flushed with alcohol and excitement. Chloe, her coworker from the tech company, giggled and raised her own glass. "To my dear friend Veronica," Lila continued, her voice carrying across the room, "who's finally decided to take control of her life. She's ready to move on from the past and embrace her future." My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. Around me, other patrons were starting to pay attention, sensing drama in the air. "Time to move on. I want a divorce," Veronica shouted, raising her glass with a laugh that sounded forced even to my ears. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, but I'd been expecting them for weeks. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd started looking at me like I was something she'd stepped in, it all made sense now. The bar erupted in nervous laughter and whispers. Some people looked shocked, others seemed to think it was just another drunken joke. But I knew better. I'd seen this coming from miles away. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the wooden floor. The sound cut through the noise like a gunshot, and suddenly every eye in the place was on me. Veronica's face went pale as she realized I'd heard everything. "Well, honey," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room, "you're in luck." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with legal documents. The papers made a satisfying thud as I dropped them on her table, right next to her half-empty martini glass. "Divorce papers," I announced to the room. "Filed this morning, signed, sealed, and ready for delivery." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that crowded bar. Veronica stared at the envelope like it might explode, her mouth opening and closing without making a sound. "But wait," I continued, pulling out my phone. "There's more." I'd spent the last 3 weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, building my case. The private investigator I'd hired had been worth every penny. The photos, the text messages, the hotel receipts, it was all there, documented and ready for the world to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the room like a ringmaster at a circus, "I present to you the real reason my wife wants a divorce. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." I pressed play on the video I'd prepared. The bar's old sound system crackled to life as audio filled the room, text messages read aloud in a computer-generated voice, accompanied by photos that left nothing to the imagination. From Veronica to Eliot Brandt, Tuesday at 2:47 p.m. "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. Jack's working late, so we have the house to ourselves." Gasps echoed through the bar. I spotted Eliot Brandt himself, sitting at the far end of the room, his face turning the color of old concrete. The married tech executive had been pursuing my wife for months, thinking he was clever, thinking no one would notice. From Eliot to Veronica, Wednesday at 11:23 a.m. "My wife suspects nothing. After your divorce comes through, we can be together openly. I'll leave Jennifer and we'll start fresh." Jennifer Brandt, Eliot's wife, wasn't here tonight, but I made a mental note to make sure she got a copy of this recording. She deserved to know what kind of man she'd married. The photos were the final nail in the coffin, grainy but unmistakable shots of Veronica and Eliot entering and leaving the Riverside Motel on Route 9. The timestamps showed a pattern going back 3 months. "Jack, stop!" Veronica whispered, but her voice was lost in the murmur of shocked conversation that had started up around us. "Stop what, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice dripping with false concern. Stop telling the truth? Stop showing everyone what kind of woman they've been buying drinks for all these months. Lila looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Chloe was frantically typing on her phone, probably trying to do damage control on social media. But it was too late for that. In a town this size, news traveled faster than wildfire. "You're a vindictive piece of trash," Veronica hissed, finally finding her voice. "You always were. No wonder I had to look elsewhere for real affection." "Vindictive?" I laughed, and it felt good. "Honey, I haven't even gotten started yet." That's when she made her first mistake. Desperation makes people stupid, and Veronica had always been impulsive when cornered. She grabbed her phone and started typing furiously, her fingers flying across the screen. Within seconds, my own phone started buzzing with notifications. She was posting to every social media platform she could think of, trying to flip the script, trying to make me the villain. "Jack Hartley is an abusive husband who spies on his wife and humiliates her in public," she typed for all the world to see. "He's been controlling and manipulative for years. I was afraid to leave him because of his violent temper." The accusation stung because they were so far from the truth. I'd never laid a hand on her, never even raised my voice until tonight. But in the court of public opinion, the first person to play the victim card often wins. "Violent temper?" I said, holding up my phone so everyone could see her posts. "Is that what you call it when I work 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat while you spend your afternoons in motel rooms?" "You're pathetic," she spat. "A small-town nobody with delusions of grandeur. Eliot sees my potential. He believes in me." Eliot sees an easy target," I corrected. "But don't take my word for it." I had one more card to play, and this one was going to hurt. Lila, of all people, had provided it without even knowing. Last week, she'd approached me outside the hardware store, looking nervous and guilty. "Jack," she'd said, pressing a flash drive into my hand. "I found this in Ronnie's purse when I was looking for gum. I think you need to see what's on it." The drive contained financial records, bank statements, and email correspondence that painted a picture I'd never imagined. Veronica hadn't just been cheating, she'd been planning to disappear entirely, taking half our assets and leaving me with all the debt. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, connecting the flash drive to my phone and projecting the contents onto the bar's old TV screen. "I present Exhibit B, the exit strategy." Bank statements appeared on screen, showing systematic transfers from our joint accounts to a private account I'd never seen before. Email chains between Veronica and a lawyer in Boston, discussing asset hiding and divorce strategy. Text messages between her and Chloe, planning the whole thing down to the last detail. The plan was simple, I narrated as the evidence scrolled by. Clean out the accounts, file for divorce claiming abuse, take half of everything I've worked for, and disappear with her boyfriend to start fresh somewhere else. Probably California, based on these apartment listings she's been saving. The room was completely silent now, except for the sound of Veronica's world crashing down around her. Even her friends were staring at her with a mixture of shock and disgust. I wasn't," she stammered, but the evidence spoke for itself. $73,000, I continued, pointing to the final balance on her secret account. "That's how much of our money you've already stolen. Money I earned with my hands, working in that fabrication shop 12 hours a day while you played house with your boyfriend." Eliot Brandt had heard enough. He stood up from his table, threw some money down, and headed for the door. But I wasn't done with him yet. "Leaving so soon, Eliot?" I called out. "Don't you want to stick around and support your girlfriend in her time of need?" He paused at the door, his shoulders tense. For a moment, I thought he might actually turn around and face the music like a man. Instead, he pushed through the door and disappeared into the night. "Even your boyfriend won't stand by you now," I told Veronica. "What does that tell you about the strength of your relationship?" She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. But I felt no pity for her. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. "No, sweetheart," I replied, finishing my beer and standing to leave. "You did that all by yourself. I just made sure everyone got to see it." I walked toward the door, feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, I could hear Veronica's friends trying to comfort her, but their voices sounded hollow and uncertain. They'd seen the evidence. They knew the truth now. As I reached for the door handle, I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, angry footsteps that could only belong to one person. "Hartley!" I turned to find Eliot Brandt standing in the parking lot, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face twisted with rage. Apparently, he'd decided to grow a spine, after all. "That was quite a show in there," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" "Clever enough to catch you with your pants down," I replied. "Literally, in some of those photos." He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me with his height and his expensive cologne. But I'd been working with my hands my whole life, building muscle and calluses while he pushed papers and attended meetings. If he wanted to make this physical, I was ready. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he threatened. "I have connections in this town. I can make your life very difficult." I laughed, and the sound echoed off the brick walls of the old mill building. "Connections? You mean like your wife Jennifer, who's going to get a copy of tonight's recording? Or maybe your boss at the tech company, who's going to love hearing about how you've been using company resources to conduct your affair?" His face went even paler. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I said, pulling out my phone. "In fact, let me call Jennifer right now. I bet she's wondering where you are." That's when he made his move, lunging forward and trying to grab my phone. But I'd been expecting it. I stepped aside, letting his momentum carry him past me, then grabbed his wrist and twisted until he dropped his own phone on the asphalt. "Next time," I said, releasing his wrist and watching him stumble backward. "It's your car." I crushed his phone under my boot, the screen shattering into 1,000 pieces. Then I walked to my truck, leaving him standing in the parking lot, nursing his bruised wrist and his wounded pride. As I drove away, I could see him through my rearview mirror, kneeling on the ground and trying to salvage the pieces of his phone. It was a fitting metaphor for what was left of his carefully constructed life. The first phase of my revenge was complete, but this was just the beginning. Veronica and Eliot had declared war on my life, my marriage, and my dignity. Now they were going to learn what happened when you picked a fight with someone who had nothing left to lose. I drove through the empty streets of our little mill town, past the old textile buildings that had been converted into trendy offices, past the Victorian houses where families like mine had lived for generations. This place had been good to me, had given me everything I needed to build a life. I wasn't about to let two selfish, cheating cowards destroy that. My phone buzzed with text messages. Probably Ben checking on me, maybe some of the bar regulars wanting to know if what they'd seen was real, but I ignored them all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. Tonight, I just wanted to savor the look of shock and humiliation on Veronica's face when her perfect plan fell apart. The war had begun, and I intended to win it. The fabrication shop felt like a sanctuary at 2 a.m. The familiar smell of metal shavings and welding gas surrounded me as I sat at my desk, planning my next move. The overhead fluorescents cast harsh shadows across the blueprints and invoices scattered in front of me, but I preferred the stark lighting to the soft deception of home. Ben had followed me here after the bar, bringing coffee and his usual mix of concern and curiosity. He perched on a stool beside my desk, watching me work through the financial documents Lila's flash drive had provided. "You realize you just declared war on half the town's social elite," he said, sipping his coffee. "Eliot has friends in high places." "Eliot has drinking buddies who think they're important," I corrected, highlighting another suspicious transaction. "There's a difference. Besides, after tonight, I doubt many of them will want to be associated with him." The numbers told a story that made my stomach churn. 73,000 was just the beginning. Veronica had been systematically draining our accounts for months, timing her withdrawals to coincide with my busiest periods when I was too distracted to notice. "She's been planning this since Christmas," I muttered, cross-referencing dates. "Remember when she insisted on handling all our finances? Said she wanted to take the burden off my shoulders so I could focus on growing the business?" "And you believed her," Ben said. "It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact." "I trusted her," I admitted. "Stupid of me, but there it is." My phone buzzed with another text message. I'd been getting them all night, some supportive, others curious, a few downright hostile. Word was spreading through town faster than I'd expected. This one was from Mrs. Crowitz, our elderly neighbor. "Jack, dear, I saw Veronica loading suitcases into a strange car this afternoon. Thought you should know." I showed the message to Ben, who whistled low. She was planning to run tonight. The whole divorce announcement was probably meant to be her farewell performance. "Except I ruined her grand finale," I said, feeling a grim satisfaction. "Now she's stuck here, dealing with the consequences." I pulled up the contact information for our bank and started making notes. First thing Monday morning, I'd be filing papers to freeze all our joint accounts and demanding a full audit of every transaction from the past 6 months. The evidence on Lila's flash drive would make that process much easier. "What about the house?" Ben asked. "Already handled," I replied, pulling out another set of documents. "Filed a restraining order this afternoon, citing financial fraud and emotional distress. She can't come within 500 feet of the property or the business until the divorce is finalized." Ben raised an eyebrow. "You've been busy." 3 weeks of planning," I admitted. I knew this day was coming. I just didn't know exactly when or how. The truth was, I'd started suspecting something was wrong back in February. Veronica had become distant, distracted, always checking her phone and making excuses to leave the house. At first, I'd thought she might be planning a surprise for my birthday. Then I'd considered the possibility that she was having some kind of personal crisis, maybe a midlife awakening or career dissatisfaction. It wasn't until I'd accidentally seen a text message from someone named E that the pieces started falling into place. The message itself had been innocent enough, something about meeting for coffee, but the tone had been intimate in a way that made my chest tighten with suspicion. I hired a private investigator, I continued, showing Ben a folder full of surveillance photos. Professional guy, former state police. He's been documenting everything for 3 weeks. The photos were damning. Veronica and Eliot entering the Riverside Motel, Veronica and Eliot having lunch at restaurants in neighboring towns, Veronica and Eliot kissing in the parking lot of her office building. This must have cost a fortune, Ben said, flipping through the images. Worth every penny, I replied. In a divorce proceeding, this kind of evidence can be the difference between losing half your assets and keeping what you've worked for. My phone rang, startling both of us. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Jack Hartley. Mr. Hartley, this is Detective Harlan with the local police. I'm calling about an incident report filed tonight involving you and Eliot Brandt. My stomach dropped. What kind of incident report? Mr. Brandt claims you assaulted him in the parking lot of the Old Mill Bar and destroyed his personal property. He's requesting that we investigate the matter. I looked at Ben, who was listening intently. Detective, I never assaulted anyone. Mr. Brandt lunged at me, trying to grab my phone. I defended myself, and in the process, his phone was damaged. There were witnesses. I see. Well, we'll need you to come in tomorrow to give a statement. Can you be here around 10 a.m.? I'll be there, I said, already planning my defense strategy. After I hung up, Ben shook his head. That didn't take long. Eliot's trying to control the narrative, I explained. He knows what happened tonight is going to spread through town like wildfire. He's trying to make me look like the aggressor. Will it work? Not with the evidence I have, I said, tapping the folder of surveillance photos. Plus, half the bar saw him come after me. Mrs. Dorsey from the motel is going to be very interested in talking to the police about her frequent guests. Mrs. Dorsey ran the Riverside Motel and had a reputation for being both discreet and observant. She'd been in the hospitality business for 40 years and had seen everything. More importantly, she kept detailed records of her guests and their activities. I spent the next hour organizing my evidence and preparing for the police interview. By the time Ben left, I had a clear strategy for the coming days. The legal battle was just beginning, but I felt confident in my position. At 4 a.m., I finally locked up the shop and drove home. The house felt different now, emptier, but also cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the air. I walked through the rooms, noting all the little things Veronica had taken with her. Her jewelry box, her favorite coffee mug, the framed photo of her college sorority sisters. In our bedroom, I found evidence of her hasty packing. Drawers left open, hangers scattered on the floor, a trail of cosmetics leading from the vanity to the door. She'd been in a hurry, probably panicked after realizing I'd outmaneuvered her. I changed the locks anyway. It was a symbolic gesture as much as a practical one. This was my house now, bought with my money and maintained with my labor. She'd forfeited any claim to it when she decided to betray everything we'd built together. My phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Lila. Jack, I'm so sorry. I had no idea how bad things had gotten. Ronnie's been lying to all of us. I almost felt sorry for her. Lila had genuinely believed she was helping a friend escape an unhappy marriage. She'd had no idea she was actually enabling theft and adultery. In a way, Veronica had betrayed her friends just as thoroughly as she'd betrayed me. I typed back, Not your fault. You did the right thing by showing me that flash drive. Her response came immediately. She's staying at the Riverside Motel. Eliot dropped her off around midnight and left. She looked pretty shaken up. That was useful information. Mrs. Dorsey would have a front row seat to Veronica's downfall, and she wasn't known for keeping quiet about dramatic guests. By morning, half the town would know that the woman who'd announced her divorce so publicly was now staying in a cheap motel, abandoned by her boyfriend. I set my alarm for 7 a.m. and tried to get some rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the police interview, the bank meetings, the inevitable confrontations with Veronica and her remaining allies. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. The war was far from over, but I'd won the first battle decisively. Now it was time to press my advantage and make sure Veronica and Eliot paid the full price for their betrayal. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking about the look on Veronica's face when I dropped those divorce papers on her table. The shock, the fear, the sudden realization that her carefully laid plans had crumbled in an instant. It was a memory I'd treasure for a long time, but it was nothing compared to what I had planned for tomorrow. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and disappointment. Detective Harlan was exactly what I'd expected. A weathered man in his 50s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He'd probably seen every kind of domestic drama this town had to offer, and I could tell he wasn't impressed by any of it. "So, Mr. Hartley," he said, settling into his chair across from me in the interview room, "tell me what happened last night." I'd spent the morning preparing for this conversation, organizing my thoughts and evidence into a coherent narrative. The key was to stick to the facts and let the documentation speak for itself. My wife announced her intention to divorce me publicly at the Old Mill Bar. I began. I responded by serving her with papers I'd already filed and presenting evidence of her extramarital affair and financial misconduct. Detective Harlan raised an eyebrow. "You had divorce papers ready." "I've suspected something was wrong for weeks," I explained, sliding a folder across the table. "This contains documentation of my wife's affair with Eliot Brandt, including photographs, text messages, and financial records showing systematic theft from our joint accounts." He opened the folder and whistled low as he flipped through the contents. "This is quite a collection. How did you obtain these materials?" "I hired a licensed private investigator," I said, producing the investigator's business card and contract. "Everything was obtained legally and ethically." "And the incident with Mr. Brandt in the parking lot?" "He followed me outside and became aggressive when I mentioned contacting his wife about the affair. He lunged at me, trying to grab my phone. I defended myself, and his phone was damaged in the struggle." Detective Harlan made notes as I spoke. "Mr. Brandt claims you threatened him and deliberately destroyed his property." "There were witnesses," I replied. "Ben Morrison, my business partner, saw the whole thing. So did several other bar patrons who had come outside. Mr. Brandt was the aggressor." "We'll be interviewing the witnesses," he said. "In the meantime, I need to ask, do you have any intention of harming Mr. Brandt or your wife?" "None whatsoever," I said firmly. "I want them held accountable for their actions through legal channels. Violence would only undermine my position in the divorce proceedings." He seemed satisfied with that answer. "One more thing. Mr. Brandt mentioned that you made threatening statements about his car." I couldn't help but smile at that. I told him that next time, it would be his car instead of his phone. It was a figure of speech, Detective. I'm not planning to vandalize anyone's property. "See that you don't," he warned. "This town doesn't need an escalating feud between you and Mr. Brandt." After the interview, I drove straight to the bank. My appointment with the branch manager had been scheduled for noon, and I arrived with my lawyer and a comprehensive file of evidence. Margaret Chen, the manager, had handled our accounts for 5 years. She knew both Veronica and me personally, which made the conversation that much more uncomfortable. "Jack, I have to say, I'm shocked by these allegations," she said, reviewing the financial records. "Veronica always seemed so responsible with money." "Responsible at hiding her activities?" my lawyer, David Park, corrected. These transfers were carefully timed to avoid detection, and the amounts were kept just below the threshold that would trigger automatic fraud alerts. We spent 2 hours going through every transaction, identifying patterns of theft and documenting the paper trail. The evidence was overwhelming. Veronica had stolen nearly $80,000 over 6 months, using a combination of electronic transfers, cash withdrawals, and credit card advances. "We'll freeze all joint accounts immediately," Margaret assured me, "and will cooperate fully with any legal proceedings." "What about the money she's already taken?" I asked. "That's a matter for the courts," David replied. "But with this level of documentation, we should be able to recover most of it through the divorce settlement." From the bank, I drove to Veronica's workplace. The tech company occupied 3 floors of a converted mill building, all exposed brick and industrial chic design. I'd been here before for company parties and holiday events, back when I'd thought my wife worked for honest people. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, looked uncomfortable when I asked to speak with the Human Resources Director. "Is Mrs. Hartley expecting you?" she asked. "Mrs. Hartley doesn't work here anymore," I replied. "At least she won't after today." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Janet Williams, the HR director, explaining the situation and providing copies of my evidence. "This is very serious," she said, studying the text messages between Veronica and Eliot. "They were using company resources to conduct a personal affair." "Company computers, company phones, company time," I confirmed. Some of these messages were sent during business hours, and several of their meetings took place in the office after normal working hours. Janet's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the evidence. "Mr. Brandt is a senior executive. This kind of behavior violates multiple company policies. I thought you should know, I said. What you do with the information is up to you. I left the tech company feeling satisfied. By Monday, both Veronica and Eliot would be facing serious professional consequences for their personal choices. The scandal would follow them wherever they went, making it much harder for them to start fresh somewhere else. My phone rang as I was walking back to my truck. The caller ID showed Mrs. Dorsey from the Riverside Motel. "Jack, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said in her gravelly smoker's voice. "But I thought you should know. Your wife checked in last night, and she's been making quite a scene." "What kind of scene?" "Crying, yelling at people on the phone, throwing things around her room. She tried to get me to let her use the office phone to make long-distance calls, said her cell phone wasn't working. I told her she'd have to pay for any calls in advance." Mrs. Dorsey had been running the motel for 30 years and had developed a sixth sense for drama. She'd probably seen dozens of affairs, breakups, and family crises play out in her rooms. "Has Eliot Brandt been back?" I asked. "Not since he dropped her off. She keeps looking out the window like she's expecting someone, but nobody's come. I think she's starting to realize she's on her own." That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. Eliot was cutting his losses, abandoning Veronica now that their affair had been exposed. She was learning the hard way that men who cheat with married women rarely stick around when things get complicated. "One more thing," Mrs. Dorsey added. She asked about extended rates, like she might be staying for a while, but when I told her the weekly rate, she looked pretty upset. I don't think she has as much money as she thought she did. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "I appreciate the information." After hanging up, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, processing the day's events. The legal machinery was now in motion. Accounts frozen, evidence filed, professional consequences initiated. Veronica and Eliot were both facing the collapse of their carefully constructed lives. But I wasn't done yet. Tonight, I had plans to visit the old mill bar again. Word of last night's confrontation had spread through town, and I wanted to gauge the public reaction. In a community this size, reputation mattered more than money sometimes. Ben was waiting for me at the shop when I returned. He had news of his own. "Chloe came by about an hour ago," he said. "She wanted to talk to you about Veronica." "What did she want?" "She's trying to do damage control, says Veronica is devastated and didn't mean for things to go this far. She wants to arrange a meeting so you two can work things out privately." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Work things out? She stole $80,000 and was planning to disappear with her boyfriend. What exactly is there to work out? "That's what I told her," Ben replied. "But she seemed to think you might be willing to negotiate if Veronica apologized and agreed to pay back the money." "Too late for that," I said. "She made her choice when she decided to humiliate me publicly. Now she gets to live with the consequences." Ben nodded approvingly. "Good, because I think Chloe might be playing both sides. She seemed awfully interested in knowing what evidence you had and whether you were planning to press criminal charges." That was interesting information. Chloe had been one of Veronica's closest allies, helping to plan and execute the affair. If she was now trying to broker a peace deal, it meant they were scared about how far this might go. "Let them worry," I said. "Fear makes people make mistakes, and I'm counting on them to make plenty more." As evening approached, I prepared for another visit to the old mill bar. Tonight would be different from last night. Instead of shocking revelations, I'd be dealing with the aftermath. Some people would be sympathetic, others would be critical, and a few would just be curious about what would happen next. But I was ready for all of them. The first battle had been about exposing the truth. The second battle would be about controlling the narrative and making sure the town understood exactly who the real villains were in this story. Veronica and Eliot had started this war when they'd decided to betray me. Now they were going to learn what it meant to fight someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The evening was just beginning, and I had a feeling it was going to be even more interesting than the night before. The abandoned Riverside Mill loomed against the night sky like a monument to better times. 3 stories of red brick and broken windows, it had been the heart of our town's economy for over a century before cheap foreign labor and changing markets had rendered it obsolete. Now it served as a meeting place for teenagers, urban explorers, and apparently cheating spouses planning their next move. Ben and I crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the main entrance through binoculars. My phone showed 11:47 p.m., 3 minutes before the meeting time Chloe had accidentally revealed during her visit to the shop that afternoon. "You sure about this?" Ben whispered. "Chloe let slip that Veronica wanted to meet with E tonight to figure out their next move," I replied, adjusting the portable floodlights we'd positioned around the building's perimeter. She didn't realize I was listening from the back office. "And you think they're planning something?" "I know they are. Veronica's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things." Right on schedule, headlights appeared on the access road. Eliot's BMW pulled up to the mill's loading dock, its engine purring expensively in the quiet night. He sat in the car for several minutes, probably checking his surroundings, before finally stepping out. 5 minutes later, a second set of headlights announced Veronica's arrival. She was driving a rental car, probably because her own vehicle was having mechanical difficulties. I'd made sure of that earlier in the day when I'd paid a visit to the motel parking lot with a bag of steel shavings and a funnel. "Here we go," I murmured, watching them embrace awkwardly before heading into the building. Ben and I had spent the afternoon preparing for this moment. The mill's interior was a maze of rusted machinery, collapsed floors, and dangerous debris. We'd mapped out the safest routes and positioned our equipment strategically, turning the abandoned building into a stage for the final act of their relationship. "Give them 10 minutes to get comfortable," I said, checking my watch. "Then we light them up." Through our surveillance equipment, we could hear their voices echoing through the empty building. They'd chosen the old supervisor's office on the second floor, probably thinking the elevation would give them privacy and a good view of anyone approaching. "This is a disaster, Eliot," Veronica was saying. "Jack has evidence of everything. Photos, bank records, text messages. My lawyer says I could face criminal charges for the money transfers." "Calm down," Eliot replied, though his voice sounded strained. "We just need to be smart about this. Maybe we can work out some kind of deal with him." "A deal?" "He humiliated me in front of the entire town, posted our private messages for everyone to see. My own mother won't return my phone calls." "Look, maybe we moved too fast," Eliot said. "Maybe we should take a break, let things cool down for a while." There it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Eliot was already preparing to abandon ship, leaving Veronica to face the consequences alone. It was exactly what I'd predicted, and exactly what she deserved to hear. "A break?" Veronica's voice rose to a shriek. "You promised me we'd be together. You said you'd leave Jennifer and we'd start fresh." "That was before your husband turned into some kind of revenge-obsessed psychopath," Eliot snapped. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to my career? HR called me into a meeting this afternoon. They're talking about suspension pending investigation." "So we run," Veronica said desperately. "Take the money from my account and disappear. California, Florida, anywhere but here." "What money?" "Jack froze all your accounts, remember? And $73,000 doesn't go very far when you're starting over from scratch." "Then we'll get more. Jack has assets. The house, the business, equipment. We can force him to liquidate everything as part of the divorce settlement." That's when I decided they'd heard enough of each other's voices. It was time for them to hear mine. I flipped the switch on our portable PA system, flooding the mill with the sound of their own conversation from the previous week. Recordings the private investigator had captured during their planning sessions. From the audio files of Veronica Hartley and Eliot Brandt, recorded March 15th, my voice boomed through the building. Quote, "Jack's so stupid he'll never see it coming. By the time he realizes what's happening, we'll be long gone with everything he's worked for." The effect was immediate and dramatic. We could hear them scrambling around upstairs, probably trying to figure out where the sound was coming from and how to escape. "Surprise, sweetheart," I continued over the PA. "Did you really think you could meet in secret without me finding out? In case you're wondering, yes, I'm recording this conversation too." That's when Ben hit the floodlights. The mill's interior exploded with brilliant white light, turning every shadow into stark relief and every hiding place into an exposed stage. Through the broken windows, we could see Veronica and Eliot frozen like deer in headlights, their faces pale with shock and fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, knowing my voice was carrying across the mill complex and probably reaching the crowd of bar regulars Ben had invited under the pretense of a surprise party. "I present to you the ongoing adventures of Veronica and Eliot, still plotting to steal everything I own." The crowd that had gathered outside the mill erupted in laughter and jeers. Word had spread through town about last night's confrontation, and people were eager for the next installment of the drama. "Jack, you're insane!" Veronica screamed from the second floor. "This is harassment." "This is justice," I replied, "and we're just getting started." That's when Eliot made his second mistake of the evening. Instead of trying to negotiate or apologize, he decided to run. We watched him bolt from the supervisor's office, heading for the main staircase that led to the loading dock. But Ben and I had anticipated this move. We'd blocked the obvious exits and left only one clear path, a route that would take him through the most treacherous part of the building. "Eliot's making a break for it," I announced to the crowd. "Let's see how fast a middle-aged executive can run when his comfortable life is falling apart." Ben and I entered the building through the side entrance, our flashlights cutting through the artificial daylight created by our floodlights. The mill's interior was even more dangerous at night, with loose floorboards, exposed machinery, and debris scattered everywhere. We could hear Eliot crashing through the building ahead of us, his expensive dress shoes slipping on the oily floors and his panicked breathing echoing off the brick walls. He was heading for the north exit, probably hoping to circle back to his car. "Careful, Eliot," I called out, my voice carrying through the empty spaces. "Some of those floorboards are rotten. Wouldn't want you to fall through and hurt yourself." The chase led us through 3 floors of industrial archaeology, past rusted looms, collapsed conveyor systems, and piles of decaying textile machinery. Eliot was in decent shape for his age, but he was running blind through unfamiliar territory while Ben and I knew every obstacle and hazard. "This is what happens when you try to steal another man's life," I shouted as we closed the distance. "Eventually, you have to face the consequences." Eliot reached the north stairwell and started down, taking the steps 2 at a time in his desperation to escape. But the staircase was one of the most damaged parts of the building, with several steps missing and the handrail torn away. The inevitable happened on the second-floor landing. His foot went through a rotten board, sending him tumbling forward onto the concrete floor. He wasn't seriously hurt, just scraped and bruised, but his dignity was completely shattered. Ben and I stood over him as he struggled to get back on his feet, his expensive suit torn and dirty, his face streaked with rust and grime. "Next time you screw something," I said, looking down at him with contempt, "make sure it isn't my life. Or my wife." "You're both crazy," he gasped, holding his scraped hands against his chest. "I'm calling the police." "With what phone?" Ben asked, pointing to the shattered remains of Eliot's replacement device, which had fallen out of his pocket during the tumble. "Besides," I added, "I'm sure Detective Harlan would love to hear about your romantic rendezvous in an abandoned building. Really shows your commitment to staying away from my wife during the divorce proceedings." Eliot struggled to his feet and limped toward the exit, his expensive shoes squelching in puddles of stagnant water. "This isn't over, Hartley." "You're right," I agreed. "It's not over. It's just getting started." By the time we made it back outside, Eliot was gone, probably walking back to town since his car keys had disappeared during his fall. The crowd of spectators was buzzing with excitement, already spreading the story of his humiliating flight through the mill. But Veronica was still inside, trapped in the supervisor's office with nowhere to run. It was time for the final confrontation. "Veronica," I called through the PA system, "your boyfriend has abandoned you. Again. Are you starting to see a pattern here?" Her response came through the broken windows, shrill with desperation. "I want a lawyer. This is kidnapping." "This is a public building," I replied. "You're free to leave any time you want. But first, I think the good people of this town deserve to hear the rest of your plan." I played the remaining audio files, recordings of Veronica discussing how to hide assets, how to claim abuse in order to gain sympathy in divorce court, and how to disappear with Eliot once they'd stolen everything they could from me. The crowd's reaction was swift and brutal. These were working people who understood the value of loyalty and hard work. They had no patience for someone who would betray their spouse and steal their livelihood. "Veronica Hartley, you're a disgrace," someone shouted. "Get out of our town," yelled another voice. By the time she finally emerged from the building, her face was streaked with tears and her expensive outfit was wrinkled and stained. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman whose carefully constructed life had collapsed in the span of 2 days. "I hope you're satisfied," she said as she passed me on her way to the rental car. "Not yet," I replied, "but I'm getting there." She drove away into the night, leaving behind a crowd of people who now knew exactly what kind of person she really was. The mill chase was over, but the war was far from finished. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for revenge. But tonight had been a complete victory, and I intended to savor every moment of it. The town square buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt since the 4th of July festival. Word had spread about tonight's truth-telling event, as Veronica had pompously announced it on social media. She'd spent the weekend trying to rebuild her image, posting carefully crafted messages about surviving abuse, and finding the courage to speak her truth. It was a desperate gambit, and exactly the kind of mistake I'd been hoping she'd make. I arrived early, wanting to gauge the crowd and prepare for whatever performance she had planned. The square was already half full, with more people streaming in from the surrounding streets. Some came out of curiosity, others out of loyalty to one side or the other, but most came because they sensed trouble brewing. Ben appeared at my elbow, carrying a large duffel bag. "You ready for this?" "More than ready," I replied, checking my phone. "Did you get everything set up?" "PA system, projector, laptop, and enough extension cords to power a small concert," he confirmed, plus the backup recordings in case she tries to interfere with the electronics. Veronica had chosen her ground well. The town square was public property, which meant she couldn't be accused of trespassing or harassment. The gazebo in the center provided a natural stage. and the surrounding benches and lawn could accommodate a substantial crowd. What she hadn't counted on was my own preparation. At exactly 7 p.m., she appeared with her remaining supporters. Chloe walked beside her, looking nervous but determined. Gavin, Eliot's former best friend, brought up the rear, carrying what looked like a box of documents. Eliot himself was notably absent. "Friends and neighbors," Veronica began, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "I've asked you here tonight because I need to set the record straight about what's been happening in my marriage." She looked different than she had at the mill 2 nights ago. Someone, probably Chloe, had helped her clean up her appearance and craft a message designed to generate sympathy. Her hair was pulled back severely, her makeup was minimal, and she wore a simple dress that made her look vulnerable and wronged. "For months, I've been living in fear," she continued, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "My husband has been controlling, manipulative, and increasingly violent. I was afraid to leave because I knew he would retaliate." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people were nodding sympathetically, buying into her performance. Others looked skeptical, remembering the evidence I'd presented at the bar. "The man you think you know, Jack Hartley, the hard-working business owner, is not the man I've been living with. Behind closed doors, he's been systematically destroying my self-esteem and isolating me from my friends and family." That was my cue to make my entrance. I walked through the crowd slowly, letting people see me, letting the tension build. When I reached the edge of the gazebo, I stopped and looked up at her with the expression of mild curiosity. "That's an interesting story, Veronica," I said, my voice carrying clearly without amplification. "Very creative, very fictional." The crowd turned to look at me, sensing that the real show was about to begin. "Jack, please," Chloe interjected. "Let her finish. You've had your say, now it's her turn." "Oh, she can finish," I replied, pulling out my phone. "But I think people deserve to hear the whole truth, not just the version that makes her look like a victim." I connected my phone to Ben's portable speaker system, filling the square with audio that made Veronica's face go pale. "This is a recording from last Tuesday," I announced. "Veronica talking to her sister in California about her plans." Her own voice filled the air, clear and unmistakable. "Jack's such a pushover, Linda. He has no idea what's coming. By the time I'm done with him, I'll have half of everything he's worked for, plus enough evidence of abuse to make sure he never bothers me again." The crowd's reaction was immediate and hostile. The people who had been nodding sympathetically moments before were now looking at her with disgust and anger. "That's taken out of context," she protested, but her voice was lost in the rising murmur of conversation. "Context?" I asked, playing the next recording. "Let's talk about context." This one was even more damning. A conversation between Veronica and Chloe discussing how to fabricate evidence of domestic violence, including taking photos of fake bruises and creating a false timeline of escalating abuse. "We need to make it believable," Veronica's recorded voice explained. "Nothing too dramatic, just enough to establish a pattern. A few photos, some text messages to friends asking for help, maybe a visit to the emergency room claiming he pushed me down the stairs." The crowd was getting ugly now, their voices rising in anger and condemnation. Several people were shouting questions and accusations, demanding explanations that Veronica couldn't provide. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the noise, "I present to you the real Veronica Hartley, a woman who was willing to destroy an innocent man's reputation to cover up her own crimes." That's when Gavin made his move. Instead of supporting Veronica as she'd expected, he stepped forward and opened his box of documents. "Jack's right," he announced, his voice shaking with emotion, "and I have proof of everything he's saying." The crowd fell silent, sensing another twist in the drama. "My name is Gavin Pierce," he continued. "I work at the same tech company as Veronica and Eliot. For the past month, I've been gathering evidence of their affair and their plans to defraud Jack." He pulled out a stack of printed emails, text messages, and financial documents. "Eliot Brandt has been using company resources to conduct his affair, stealing proprietary code from other employees, and embezzling funds from client accounts. Veronica has been helping him cover it up in exchange for his promise to leave his wife." This was news to me, but I wasn't about to interrupt. Gavin was doing more damage to their credibility than I could have managed on my own. "Why?" someone in the crowd shouted. "Why are you turning on them now?" Gavin's face twisted with anger. "Because Eliot stole my work and claimed credit for it. Because he's been using his position to harass female employees, and because I'm tired of watching innocent people get hurt by his schemes." He turned to face Veronica directly. "You want to talk about abuse? Let's talk about what Eliot did to Sarah in accounting when she refused his advances. Let's talk about the 3 other married women he's been pursuing while promising you he'd leave his wife." Veronica looked like she'd been struck by lightning. "That's not..." He wouldn't. He's been playing you from the beginning, Gavin continued mercilessly. You were just another conquest, another married woman he could manipulate and discard when things got complicated. The crowd was completely on my side now, their anger focused entirely on Veronica and her absent boyfriend. Several people were taking photos and videos, ensuring that this public humiliation would be preserved for posterity. Where is Eliot tonight? I asked, looking around theatrically. Shouldn't he be here supporting the woman he loves, the woman he promised to build a new life with? Chloe stepped forward, looking desperate. He had to travel for work. He wanted to be here, but... He's in Boston, Gavin interrupted. Having dinner with his wife, trying to salvage his marriage, he threw Veronica under the bus the moment things got difficult. That was the final blow. Veronica crumpled, her carefully constructed facade collapsing completely. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The crowd watched in fascination as the woman who had tried to destroy my life fell apart in front of the entire town. Veronica Hartley, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent square. You came here tonight to tell your truth. Well, now everyone knows what that truth really is. I walked closer to the gazebo, looking up at her with a mixture of contempt and pity. You're a liar, a thief, and a fraud. You betrayed your marriage, your friends, and your community for a man who was using you from the very beginning. She tried to rally, to find some shred of defiance. You've ruined everything, she whispered. No, I replied. You ruined everything. I just made sure everyone got to see it. The crowd began to disperse, their appetite for drama satisfied. As people walked away, I could hear them discussing what they'd witnessed, spreading the story to anyone who hadn't been there to see it firsthand. Veronica climbed down from the gazebo on unsteady legs, her face streaked with tears and her dignity in tatters. Chloe tried to comfort her, but even she seemed shaken by the revelations about Eliot's other affairs. This isn't over, Veronica said as she passed me. You're right, I agreed. Tomorrow the whole state is going to know what kind of person you really are. I've already sent copies of tonight's recordings to 3 news stations and a dozen online blogs. She stopped walking, her face going even paler. You wouldn't? Try me, I said. You wanted to play in public, remember? You wanted to make this a community event? Well, congratulations. You got your wish. As she walked away, supported by Chloe and followed by the few people who still felt sorry for her, I felt a deep satisfaction settle over me. The public reckoning was complete. Veronica's reputation was destroyed, her support network had crumbled, and her boyfriend had abandoned her just as I'd predicted. But I wasn't finished yet. There was still one more act to this drama, one final humiliation that would cement my victory and ensure that neither Veronica nor Eliot could ever threaten me again. The war was almost over, and I was going to win it decisively. The old mill bar had never been so packed on a Tuesday night. Every seat was taken, every table occupied, and people were standing 3 deep at the bar itself. Word had spread beyond our little town. Reporters from 2 regional papers were here, along with a blogger who specialized in small-town scandals and a documentary filmmaker who claimed to be working on a project about social media and public shaming. I sat at my usual table, nursing a beer and watching the circus unfold around me. It had been a week since the town square confrontation, and the story had taken on a life of its own. The recordings I'd released had gone viral on social media, turning our local drama into a cautionary tale about infidelity, fraud, and the dangers of underestimating your spouse. Ben slid into the seat across from me, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. Channel 8 wants to interview you for their evening news segment, something about modern marriage and social media accountability. Not interested, I replied, taking another sip of my beer. Let the story speak for itself. Smart move, he agreed. Besides, I think tonight's going to provide all the entertainment anyone could want. He was right. Veronica had requested this meeting through her lawyer, claiming she wanted to make one final attempt at reconciliation before the divorce proceedings continued. Her lawyer had insisted on a public venue, probably hoping that the presence of witnesses would keep me from saying anything too damaging. They had no idea what I had planned. At exactly 8 p.m., the bar's front door opened and Veronica walked in, flanked by her lawyer and followed by the few friends who hadn't completely abandoned her. She looked terrible, pale, thin, and hollow-eyed, like someone who hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. The bar fell silent as she made her way to the table I'd reserved for this occasion. Every eye in the place was on her, and I could see her hands shaking as she sat down across from me. Jack, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize for everything that's happened. I know I made mistakes, but I think we can work through this if we're both willing to try. Her lawyer, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. My client is prepared to return all disputed funds and agree to a no-contest divorce in exchange for your agreement to stop the public harassment campaign." I almost laughed out loud. Harassment campaign? Is that what you're calling it when someone exposes the truth? "You've destroyed her reputation," the lawyer continued, "made it impossible for her to find work or maintain relationships. Surely that's enough revenge for anyone." "Revenge?" I repeated, savoring the word. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." I stood up, and the entire bar seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the final confrontation between the wronged husband and the cheating wife who had tried to destroy him. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, addressing the packed room, "Veronica Hartley has asked me here tonight to discuss reconciliation. She wants to apologize for her mistakes and move forward with our marriage." I paused, letting the tension build. "Unfortunately, I have some news that makes that impossible." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the bar's sound system. "This morning, I received a call from Detective Harlan. It seems the district attorney's office has decided to press criminal charges against my wife for embezzlement and fraud." Gasps echoed through the room. Even Veronica's lawyer looked shocked. "The evidence we've gathered shows systematic theft of marital assets totaling more than $100,000. I continued. "That's a felony in this state, punishable by up to 5 years in prison." Veronica's face went completely white. "That's not... I was going to pay it back." "Too late for that," I said, playing the recording of her confession to the district attorney's investigator. "You had your chance to do the right thing. Instead, you chose to lie, cheat, and steal." The recording filled the bar with Veronica's own voice, admitting to the theft and explaining her methods in detail. She'd thought she was negotiating a plea deal, but the investigator had made it clear that her confession would be used against her in court. "But that's not the best part," I continued, enjoying the look of growing horror on her face. "Tell them about Eliot, honey. Tell them what happened to your great love affair." She couldn't speak, so I did it for her. "Eliot Brandt was arrested yesterday for embezzling client funds from his tech company," I announced. Apparently, he'd been stealing money for months to finance his lifestyle and his affairs. When the FBI raided his office, they found evidence linking him to at least 6 other women he'd been manipulating and defrauding. The crowd erupted in shocked conversation. This was news to most of them, and it painted Eliot in an even worse light than they'd imagined. "He's cooperating with federal investigators now," I continued, providing information about his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. Guess whose name came up in his testimony? Veronica tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. "The FBI will be contacting you soon," I told her. "Something about your role in laundering stolen funds through your secret bank account." Her lawyer was frantically taking notes, probably calculating how much this was going to cost him in legal fees and reputation damage. "So you see," I said, addressing the room again, "reconciliation is off the table. My wife is going to be a convicted felon, and her boyfriend is looking at federal prison time. I think I can do better." I raised my beer glass in a mock toast. "To Veronica Hartley. You wanted a divorce, and you're going to get one, along with a criminal record, a destroyed reputation, and the knowledge that you threw away everything good in your life for a man who was using you from day one." The crowd joined in the toast, their voices raised in celebration of justice served. Veronica sat frozen in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her downfall. "Your trip's been canceled," I said, looking directly at her. "So has your future." That was the line I'd been saving for this moment, the perfect ending to a perfect victory. Veronica had planned to disappear with Eliot, to start fresh somewhere far away from the consequences of their actions. Instead, she was facing prison time, financial ruin, and social exile. The bar erupted in applause and cheers. People were taking photos and videos, capturing the moment when the town's most notorious adulteress finally faced the full consequences of her betrayal. Veronica's lawyer helped her to her feet and guided her toward the door, pushing through the crowd of spectators and reporters. She moved like a sleepwalker, her face blank with shock and despair. As they reached the door, she turned back one last time, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and defeat. "I hope you're satisfied," she said, her voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. "I am," I replied, "completely." The door closed behind her, and she was gone from my life forever. The crowd continued celebrating, buying rounds of drinks and rehashing the highlights of our public war. But I felt strangely calm, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Ben appeared at my side, raising his own glass. "So what now?" I looked around the bar, at the faces of people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. These were my real friends, my real community. They'd seen me at my worst and stood by me when it mattered most. "Now," I said, finishing my beer, "now I get on with my life. The real one, without lies or betrayal or people who don't deserve my trust. The war was over, and I had won it completely. Veronica would spend the next few years dealing with criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and the social consequences of her choices. Eliot would be in federal prison, his career destroyed and his reputation in ruins, and I would be free to rebuild, free to find someone worthy of my loyalty, free to live without looking over my shoulder or wondering when the next betrayal would come. Sometimes the underdog wins, sometimes justice prevails. And sometimes, when you are fighting for everything you've worked for, you discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined. The toast that had started this whole mess had been about moving on and wanting a divorce. Well, Veronica had gotten her wish. She was moving on, to prison, and I was getting exactly what I'd wanted all along: the truth, justice, and the satisfaction of watching my enemies destroy themselves through their own greed and stupidity. The last toast was mine, and it tasted like victory.